if you look at this chart and you see, OK, there's one way to take the whole chart as data, and there's another way to do this by making vertical slices, it's bound to occur to you, what happens if we make horizontal slices through the table? I mean, it sounds like a pretty strange thing to do, but once you have this idea of slices, what about that kind of slice? That's our next big idea. It's called message passing. And let me show you how it works. Oh, first of all, just as a reminder, we had these two procedures, area and perimeter, that merely call the operate procedure as a kind of syntactic sugar, notation, something that's purely notational that we don't need to do the job, but it just looks more like what users want. That's called syntactic sugar, and it led to the famous aphorism by Alan Perlis that syntactic sugar leads to cancer of the semicolon. So those of you who've programmed in other languages will understand. So oops. So in order to do message passing, we're going to change the way we create individual shapes in our system of notation. So for conventional and for message passing style, we just used the idea of tagged data. So we had something that looked like this. Square, that's the type tag, and 4, that's the side of the square. Okay, and that would be the shape. And now what we're doing is we're going to represent shapes as procedures. So if I say define S4 to make square 4, what's the value of S4? Well, it's a procedure. It is, to be exact, this procedure with 4 substituted for side. Similarly, I can say define S5 make square. Hardest part about this is spelling square. And I get a different procedure. It doesn't look so very different, but it's a little bit different. And it does behave differently because here we've substituted 5 for side in the 3 places where it appears here. Okay? So you've seen something like this before. Back when we introduced pairs, and I said, and the book said, we actually don't need to have pairs as a primitive feature of our language because we can implement pairs using lambda. Remember? So we said define cons of AB to be lambda of message. If the message is car, return A. If the message is coulda, return B. And we're doing the same thing here. We're representing a square as a procedure that takes a message as an argument, and then it says, if the message is area, and here's the formula for the area. If the message is perimeter, here's the formula for the perimeter. And similarly, oops, make circle is the same thing. It's also creating one of these message passing procedures, except that the formulas are different. They have pi in them. So instead of side squared, it's pi r squared, pi radius squared. And instead of side times 4, it's 2 times pi times radius. Okay? Any questions so far about how we're representing shapes? So I'd like you to convince yourself, first of all, that this way of representing shapes is, in fact, a horizontal slice through this conceptual table. That we represent a square as something that knows all the formulas for all the operators on squares. In this simple example, there are only two of them, area and perimeter. And we represent a circle as a horizontal slice on the circle line that knows all the formulas for circles. So now what we have to do is figure out what happens. How are we going to make it work for me to say area S5 and still get the answer that I want? And the way that that works is really kind of beautiful. Here it is. It's a much simpler version of operate. The first operate wasn't very complicated, but this one's even simpler. Because an object now, which is a square or a circle or whatever, is executable. It's a procedure. And so we just invoke it with the operator, which is a word, as its argument. So when I say area S5, what I'm really saying is operate, quote, area S5. And that in turn is saying invoke S5 with area as its argument. Okay, so all these three things that I've said on the bottom half of the screen are the same. Questions? Yeah. Okay, how is area defined? I inherited this old definition of area left over from data-directed programming. I don't have to change anything except for the operate procedure. So that's kind of cute. Good question, though.